Welcome everybody. I'm Daryl Price, the National Head of Health and Aged Care for Grant Thornton. Today I'm joined by Coralie Nichols, Melissa Argent and Charles Moore, all new CEOs to the sector, and Belinda Hegarty, the National Head of Healthcare for Commonwealth Bank of Australia. Today we're going to be talking about what this sector means to us and how we feel as individuals about what is possible and what the opportunities might be for organisations in the aged care sector. We all know that the Royal Commission has handed down its final report, and in the latter part of the session we'll be discussing some of the issues within that. As three new CEOs to the sector, I feel that we'll get some great insights as to the optimism that is afforded to us if we look at the Royal Commission's report and potentially the government response in a way that frames our organisations for the future. I'll just ask each of our CEOs and Belinda to introduce themselves. Coralie?
Hi, I'm Coralie Nichols. I've been here at the Newcastle Diocese overseeing the work of Anglican Care since October, but been the Diocesan Chief Executive since March of last year. I have never worked in the aged care sector. I come out of a background of local government. I have worked in the not-for-profit sector previously as well.
Melissa?
Hi, Daryl. I'm Melissa Argent, the CEO of Rockpool Residential Aged Care. So I do have a clinical background and spent many years in and out of the sector, making a bit of a jump out to the financial sector prior to Rockpool for the last 4 years. So it's wonderful to be back at what I see as a very exciting time.
Thank you. Charles?
Hi guys, Charles Moore. I've been fortunate to have worked over the past 30 odd years, so now you're starting to date me already, in both the private and government sectors, across a diverse range of areas that have included asset management, property investment and development, funds management, placemaking and community building. You'll note in that resume that there is nothing to do with the aged care sector or the not-for-profit sector. So yes, I am definitely a new boy.
Thank you. Belinda?
Hi, Daryl. I head up what's called our National Healthcare team over at CBA, and what my team does is look at what is our strategy and appetite in lending to the sector. So as you can imagine, we've been doing a lot of work on what the Royal Commission recommendations could mean for the sector. So really excited to be having this discussion with you all today.
Belinda, we're all looking forward to what you've got to say. I think three of our guest panellists are very, very keen to hear that. So I might just start out. What was the motivation for joining the aged care sector post the calling of the Royal Commission? What was the driver for each of you?
Yeah, I'm happy to launch off, Daryl. Really, it was perhaps one of the easiest decisions. So for me, and joining Rockpool and I actually joined on day one of the lockdown for COVID in Queensland, which is a really interesting day to start in your role as CEO. But that's, I guess, one of the challenges aside from the Royal Commission. For me, the Royal Commission creates and should create some opportunity. It's around time to draw a line in the sector and say, right, how do we move forward? And what we do know, and certainly having lived through the Banking Royal Commission, is it does have to create some opportunity. The second part for me is around the team that I joined with, and that was around all of us having many years of diverse experience to come together to create a business where we can literally start from the ground up. So knowing that the Royal Commission is there and it's going to provide some guidance to us, but there's a lot of great experience and great people doing great things in this sector, and we know collectively if we put our heads together we can create something really fabulous, knowing that it's an absolute privilege to work with older Australians. So it was the easiest decision of my life, really. It was me really saying it's time to come back, and what other businesses can you have the challenges of, you know, running a great complicated financial business, but then being out with residents every other day of your life and really understanding why you do the job.
Thank you. Coralie?
Well, Rather interestingly, my role covers not just aged care, but also covers our welfare arm and our schools, and also has an oversight role into our parishes. So my role is kind of a little bit different, I suppose, to other people's, and we've chosen a very different way of structuring our organisation, which I'll touch on in a moment. I suppose I didn't necessarily choose to come into aged care per se. I choose to work in the industry of people care. So, you know, for me, I'm in a very privileged position here, from running early childhood centres through to residential aged care facilities. So I get to see the whole spectrum of people and supporting people through different stages in their lives. A little bit like Melissa was saying, I also started at the onset of COVID. So I think I was in the office for 4 days, and then we basically moved our office into a virtual space, and only staff that needed to do face-to-face work came in, and it was a really scary time. So I actually felt quite overwhelmed by managing a global pandemic in aged care, and I suspect even my seasoned colleagues probably felt a little bit the same. The way in which we've structured our organisation is we have respective executive directors that work in their areas of expertise. So we have an executive director of education and child development. We have an executive director of HR. We have an executive director of property, and we have an executive director of people care. And that takes into account not just aged care, but also disability. And so we very much work to a subject matter expert model where each of those executives move across our entire organisation, providing the support that's needed. So for me, it's been an interesting new inception of the model that we're running here, and a significant change process. Now, I suppose I'm attracted to two things. One is a growth market, and the second is the opportunity for change and innovation, and you know, through driving through innovation, leaning towards excellence. So I've come into this role because I expect that this organisation over the next couple of years will continue to do the good things that it's doing, but actually move into the space of excellence, and I want to be part of that. I think from a personal perspective, there is a need to be naturally empathetic towards working with people. I was interested to listen to a CEO last week at the Leaders Summit talk about recruiting for empathy, which was an interesting idea. But certainly I've had a lifelong interest in working with people and making sure that the services that are provided to them suit their needs.
Thanks, Coralie.
So the short answer is that I just see significant opportunity to be involved in helping create positive change that's going to make a real difference, not just to our organisation, but more importantly, in a way, to the people that we all serve. For me, it was a tremendous privilege to be invited to be part of an organisation that has such a rich history over the past 75 years of providing care for older Australians and supporting people and communities living with disadvantage. I'm already biased. I've been here since July, and I think that I've inherited, fortunately, a terrific group of people that do amazing work each and every day, despite the headwinds of COVID, despite the challenges of a vaccine rollout and the Royal Commission. So whilst there's no doubt that we have all arrived at a time of significant turmoil and change, I'm just confident that with a great team, with a trusted brand, and being the new boy on the block, just perhaps I might be able to bring some fresh ideas, a different lens to help create really positive change, not just within our business, but within the sector, so that our people who just do this awesome work each and every day can do it even better.
Charles, we've touched on a few things there. And Belinda, I've got a question for you around this in a minute, but Has anyone got any insights as to why the board chose someone who was outside the sector? And I'm asking that question because we have a number of board members on the registered for the webinar, and I'd be interested to hear your insights. Anybody?
I'm happy to jump in, Carol. Certainly perspective is a really big thing, because you're always, I think, bringing in a different perspective, along with, of course, those that are absolute experts in the industry, can only create diverse thinking. I think, secondly, an attitude of optimism and an energy around what we can achieve together in the sector. We all think differently, and if I look at my board specifically and me, and if you lined us all up, gosh, we couldn't be more different, but there is an immense trust between us, and we're all heading in the same direction, but approach it slightly differently. So we don't love each other all the time, which is a really important thing. You've got to be able to challenge each other, and certainly in the role of CEO, you do have to be confident and capable of challenging those around you, but as long as we're all heading in the same direction, and of course with the focus always on the resident and our team and knowing what we're trying to achieve.
I think I think in my circumstance, Daryl, the reason that my board looked at employing me and bringing me into the service was probably because I hadn't worked in aged care. I think that I take Charles's point. There's a lot of good people that have been working in aged care doing good things for a long time, but there's also a lot of people that are really quite exhausted by the system. And so I think they were actually looking for someone that could bring a different level of energy and a different way of thinking into the organisation to actually help people to manage their longer term views of being in the industry, such that it didn't feel like the problems were going to compound, but there might be a different way to do things, and that might help people sit up a little bit straighter, I suppose. And so for me, I know that there were conversations about what does good governance look like? How do we manage risk differently? And I think the big driver actually was to really have a think about moving away from what has been a very heavily focused clinical model here at Anglican Care, and actually start thinking about what does it look like to serve the customer and be responsive to the customer, and how to do that broader engagement piece that isn't just about the person that you are providing the service to, but also about the people that come with them. So their broader networks, be it their husbands or wives or their family or friends. So I think that from my perspective, that broader engagement piece that I bring, expertise in governance and risk management and systems and processes, because local government is renowned, particularly large scale local government. So I used to work in a very large local government in southeast Queensland, and systems and processes actually make those larger scale organisations hold together in a way that is productive and useful, so that people can get on with doing their jobs. So I know that that's been one of the key conversations that the board had with me as well about what the future held for our organisation in that regard.
It's fantastic. Charles?
I think we must have like-minded boards. Look, I think coming from out of sector does allow that different perspective, some fresh ideas. We come without baggage. The sector has been doing it really tough, as we know, for a very long time. 20 reports in 20 years. It must wear people down over time. So I think it's great to be able to turn up without that baggage and with renewed energy and enthusiasm. I say that we've got to be well, at least I'm conscious of that though. We've got some very tired people in our organisation, and we've got to be empathetic to that weariness. But we're also privileged to then be able to ask, the dumb question, just to challenge the norm. And particularly with my background, focused on growth and innovation, and some of the training that I had, even at the Commonwealth Bank, in terms of risk and governance, I think are all contributing factors to maybe why I'm have the privilege of sitting in the hot seat that I sit in today.
Thanks, Charles. Belinda, this is a beautiful segue to you. Relationships are really important from a banking perspective with senior leaders and others in organisations. You have a very large network of clients in this sector. Would you like to provide some insights about what you value in terms of those relationships and how Fresh Eyes might actually enhance that relationship?
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. You're exactly right that like any business, like aged care industry and like banking, it's a relationship business. It's understanding your clients, and it's wanting to be part of, you know, what their dreams and aspirations are, but likewise to be there with them through the tough times. And you know, I would say this has been a tough time for the industry. So for us, we welcome really honest, really open feedback that we have with clients. In terms of then, you know, as we discuss, you know, what is a good board, what is a good governance structure, I think that, you know, that the others have really hit it on the head. It's bringing that diversity of thought and bringing those, you know, bringing new ideas to meet the different challenges as they arise. And you know, from a banking perspective, you know, we look at the whole makeup of a board and senior management, and you know, we know that from a clinical care perspective, you know, most operators out there have that down pat. They're doing fabulous jobs and have had to focus really. That's where their focus is needed to be. So bringing in those new ideas from someone who hasn't necessarily come from that background, it really helps to bring the business up to the next level and allows them to, you know, take those new ideas. And I love how Charles said to ask the dumb question, because I'm sure I've been that banker in a room with clients asking a lot of dumb questions. But sometimes that's when you do discover things that clients may not have thought about themselves previously.
I think what we're reflecting on here is that a critical path forward in the aged care sector is going to be strong, informed, challenging leadership, both at a board level and an executive level. And the conversation we just had, I think, reflect that. It's interesting in announcing the government response immediately after the release of the report, Minister Hunt saying there were 3,700 places or people going to be trained at board and executive level in governance and leadership with a very much a clinical flavour to try and improve that. How do you respond to the clinical aspects of your role? It's probably unfair on Melissa because I know she's a nurse, as among many other things. So.
Well, I'm happy to go first there. I don't attempt to match anyone on clinical knowledge because it's just not my thing. So I don't pretend to be that person, but I think that the trick to having non-clinical executives is to make sure that the people that are working with you are really good at what they do and allowing them the opportunities and the space that they need to actually lead themselves at their respective levels of the organisation. And I think that it's actually quite incumbent on a executive that's coming into a space that's familiar but not expert space to really listen to the experts that are around you. But I think the other trick to that also is to not confuse the expert voice with this is what we've always done. So we're in the process of actually reviewing our services to take a different focus on what it is that we're doing. And we've actually trying to develop a real understanding of what 20 years of customer practice look like and how they inform our business versus actually what is new and innovative and what can we actually tolerate in terms of risk and innovation that's in the space. So, you know, I think that like all good teams, there's a place for everyone in terms of their subject matter expertise. I think that sometimes though I find too many, and I don't mean to sound rude by saying this, but I find too many clinicians in a room. And I actually think that clinicians have a space in the room, but the room needs to be balanced because at the end of the day, the person that we're providing a support to is my mum. It's your sister. It's, you know, so they're people that need to be looked at differently. And, you know, and even the other day I was sitting around with my clinician staff and I had a bit of a joke to them. I said, I've got this great idea. I think we should do our intake via an artist in residency and then bolt the clinical response onto the back of that. Well, that just lit up the whole room, right? But there's something in that, right? Because it just brings a different way that no one in that room would have ever considered before. Now, they all think that's mad, but I actually think there's a tremendous capacity to bring creative people into those spaces and places to return individuality and joy into the services that we provide. So I'm not saying clinicians aren't important. You need to be surrounded by good clinicians if you're a non-clinical CEO. But I think there's room for people like me in aged care.
Charles, I'm going to let Melissa have the last word. Well, actually, and Belinda.
So Coralie, I think, just nailed it. I would summarise that by saying that as a leader, you don't need to be an expert in everything. As a leader, we need to make sure that we've got really good people surrounding us. We need to trust them. We need to empower them. We need to support them. We need to equip them with the tools that they do. But it is, and Coralie, I couldn't agree more. You've got to have balance and diversity in the room, though. No one voice is more important, or no one person necessarily has all the answers. So it's about collaboration and communication at the leadership level to ensure that we're coming up with the best possible answers at a point in time.
Can't help myself, Darryl, I'm bursting. Charles and Coralie are totally right. And actually, it's a really interesting statement that always fascinates me when they say they need more clinicians at this level, because it's actually not a normal career path for a registered nurse to pursue going in and taking a senior leadership role in a bank, you know, undertaking more study in business and then learning and understanding the property development valuation side of the business. So we've actually got to be really careful when they say, let's just put more nurses in leadership roles, because for me, getting to this point, it was quite a structured, targeted approach, also with incredible mentors around me. And quite honestly, it's something I'm really passionate about. And I'm actually an active mentor for nurses that have got to this level and they've gone, oh my gosh, the financial or the building valuation side is really difficult for me to understand, and I don't feel like I've got the skill set. So I think exactly what Coralie and Charles have said, it's got to be really measured, and you've also got to look at the team surrounding you and ensuring people have got the appropriate skill sets to get to the roles that they get to. And a lot of the time it's really around the diversity in skill set of the leadership team, not just the CEO.
I undertake a number of reviews of aged care organisations and facilities, etc. And I rarely, and it only happens when I can't find somebody to help me out, but I very rarely do a walkthrough of a residential care facility, for example, or a review without having a clinician with me. And I recently one, and the clinician came and said, I'm not sure what value I added. And I said, tell me what you saw. And she spoke all about the people. And I said, and I'll tell you what I saw. And I spoke all about the numbers. I'll completely just a walkthrough and a conversation. Completely different perspectives, but jointly they actually form a picture of the whole. Over to you, Belinda.
Yeah, I'll be the first to say, as someone without any clinical experience, I'll hopefully never walk into any of our clients and tell them how to do things from a clinical perspective. And if I do, please hold me up to what I've just said. So I think it's really important that everyone has a really important part to play in delivering good quality care, and that's the clinical side, but that's likewise the processes, the policies, you know, what is the strategy going forward. And I think the recommendations for the Royal Commission have particularly called out that role of governance and really understanding responsibilities that come with being senior leaders in as an aged care operator. So I think that's really important when we talk about, you know, who are the right people that are having and holding these extremely important positions, that they feel as an organisation that they have the necessary skills and experience across their board and senior management to be able to, you know, undertake the responsibilities that are required from them from a governance perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Belinda. The next step, I'd like to move into a bit more organisational conversation, and just a few words about what you want for your organisation over the next 5 years, and to what extent did the recommendations from the Royal Commission contribute to that. Charles, how about we put you on the spot?
Yeah, sure. Probably, there's a number of things I'd like to see out of this Royal Commission. The first is that we can't let it be add to the tragedy of the last 20 reports that have just sat on shelves and gathered dust. And we've got to take, and we as a sector, I think, have got to take accountability of that. There's a lot of noise out there in the marketplace right now. So we've got to find our voice, a unified voice, I think, you know, I'll put it out there in much the same way as Black Lives Matter have found a really cut-through voice. Just as thousands and thousands of women here in Australia have found a voice over recent weeks, and calling out enough is enough. We've got to find that cut through to say that it's time to care about aged care, to see real, meaningful, significant change. The things that I'd like to see happen over the next 5 years is obviously a new funding model, and it's got to be a realistic funding model. I think there's a great reality check that we don't live in a semi-socialist state, so the taxpayer can't be expected to do all the lifting. So I think it's incumbent upon the sector to be thinking about new revenue models. Secondly, we've got to be able to secure a workforce that is well trained, that is properly rewarded for the incredible work that they do each and every day. And I'd like to see that workforce recognised in the community for that work.
Yeah.
They should be on the same pedestal. Not that I don't think the community actually puts our first responders or teachers on the pedestal that they should be. But I'd like to see our aged care workforce recognised for the work that they do. I'd like to see a single agnostic funding model that delivers a continuum of care, regardless of the choice of location or the acuity of care that's required, be that at home, in assisted living, in a residential village, or in residential care. And I think that we absolutely need, we've just been talking a little bit about governance, we need to develop a respectful governance structure with well-trained, appropriately in the not-for-profit space, remunerated board members. We need to create a transparent disclosure regime that helps create trust in the community. Yeah, I think that's that'd be my key thematics out of our 148 recommendations. If we could just do those 4 things, that'd be terrific.
Fantastic. Coralie, Melissa, would you like to add to?
Yeah, I'm happy to add. So I think there are 2 parts of this for me. One is that I think as Australians, we're having a moral dilemma. I think we really are at some very interesting spaces and places in terms of how we treat women and children through to how we treat our elderly. And I think that some of the things that have been raised by the Royal Commission and some of the images we've all seen on the television when we watch the news at night, they shock us. But at the same level, we're all part of that. So these things are not just particular to aged care. These things are particular to us as a community, as a society. And I think we're having a real moral dilemma about what do we really need to do in these spaces. And, you know, to a large degree, I suppose what the Commission is saying to us is that they want to move to a human rights model. And I think that's probably where we do need to go in those spaces to assist us with these moral dilemmas that we're having as a community. So part of my 5-year plan is for Anglican Care, how do you find your voice in the community and actually become a community leader in those conversations in terms of understanding what your community values are and who you want to be as a community going forward? Because I think we've hit a bit of a low point, and obviously as a community, I don't think there'd be very many people that would say we want to continue doing what we're doing. I think most people would follow a mantra of we can do better. So there's that community element for me over a 5-year period. And then in terms of the organisation over a 5-year period, I suppose my big thing is to develop our own model of care. While I haven't been in aged care for a long time, sadly, this is my 3rd Royal Commission. So I've seen these things come and go, and I'm probably a bit like Charles giving away my age now, but you know, these things come and go. You don't really need a Royal Commission to tell you how to behave. We know what our services should look like and what we should be doing, and we know what's causing the problems. And some of those problems quite simply are complicated systems and underfunding, and that translates into not being able to pay staff, etc., as Charles alluded to. So I'd like to develop a model of care for us over 5 years that is specific to us and that is specific to the people that we support. So it becomes our model of care. I'm happy for it to respond into the Commission space, but I want us to develop our own style and be really confident about who we are, what our offer is, and what our promise is to the customer. And I couldn't agree with Charles Moore either about just that increased transparency piece. So when an unannounced audit turns up, I would like to think we don't freak out. I'd like to think we put the kettle on and go, come on in, because not only do we want you here, but we want to share what we're doing with you here, because our success is an uplift for the whole industry. It's not just for us. And I suppose in some of those spaces, some of that regulatory mentality needs to shift a bit, so we're far more in a partnership space. You know, good regulatory activities work much better when you feel like you're partnering for a positive outcome, as opposed to you've been pulled over by the cops. So you know, we need a change in that space. So that transparency piece coupled with partnership. So that'd sort of be the key things that if you spoke to me in 5 years' time, I'd go, yep, we've achieved a community voice. We know what we stand for. We have our own model of care that responds to what our values and core practices are, as well as the Commission. And we've got a level of transparency and partnership that makes us an open and honest provider that is happy to share all of the things we know work well.
Mel?
Probably just to finish off, I want to stop talking about what's wrong with the industry. We've got it. So let's, and particularly this is where I'm trying to really drive my team, let's showcase what's right. We've got a really strong development plan at Rockpool, and we're really lucky that we do get to build our buildings from the ground up. So of course the Royal Commission report is there, the findings are there. We can't dig our head in the sand that it's going to go away, but let's set the organisation and the industry up to be adaptable to change, because we all want to grow. We know we need it. There is going to be so much need for our services. And in fact, we actually can't wait any longer. You know, for me, it's now. We've just got to get on with it. And that's certainly the approach that we're having. I love the idea of transparency in governance, and that's core of what we do. But also, we're trying to almost compete against ourselves at, you know, what are we doing and how can we do it better? Because we know benchmarking is difficult. You look at our businesses between Coralie and Charles and even Belinda, pardon me, benchmarking like with like is tough, but let's keep competing against ourselves so we can meet our strategic plan. And at the end of the day, provide not just mediocre, we want to provide remarkable, outstanding care. And that's care across clinical care and hospitality services, so that people actually look forward to coming into aged care. It can be, talk with the bias of residential aged care. I know the other panel members have a diversified businesses, but it can be a wonderful time of people's lives, and it should be a wonderful time of people's lives.
So Belinda, any insights from you?
Yeah, I'd add that I think Mel said it really well. Like we can take the report as in some ways some positive things that we can use to go, well, this is how we should, this is what good looks like, and not looking necessarily backwards and saying what has been wrong in the past. But you know, there's one document that has really put together the numerous reports previous to that and go, right, let's draw a line in the sand now and let's work towards how do we do better. What I would love to see in the 5 years, and as a banker, I can't not say this, is making sure though that the ability to do those things, that people, operators are rewarded for the fabulous work that they do and give themselves the funding that allows them to go forward and put these ideas out there. And also to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind, you know, that we are appropriately making sure that our not-for-profits continue to play the pivotal role in the community that they play, and our for-profits likewise. There's incentives to encourage additional investment in the sector, because it's with that additional investment, and that's how we really encourage change and innovation. From a banking point of view, I'll add that, you know, I'm sure you've got a question coming to me, Daryl, on the role of RADs and what they will play in the sector. But what I would say is that we want to be part of those conversations. We want to work with government, we want to work with our industry and go, what is a good funded industry to make sure that people are appropriately rewarded, and that we're getting a right investment into this sector, which we all know is going to continue to need investment into the future.
I think the attraction and retention of capital in this sector is a big question, and if you remove RADs, what's that replaced by? Because we need a substantial amount of capital coming into the sector to renew the estate, the asset portfolio. It's starting, I think the average age is around 30 years now for residential aged care facilities in particular. If we're moving to small home models and other models suggested by Royal Commissions and some of the architects around Australia, that investment's going to ramp up pretty quickly and older stock will disappear. So, you know, rural remote Australia needs a strategy around that as well, which is going to require capital. I think there's a role for the banks, there's a role for investors, but getting the balance right for government is absolutely critical. There is some criticism of the RAD model. I'm not so sure that it's warranted in some cases. But I think if we don't get that capital model right, it's going to be very difficult, and that includes an appropriate return on investment. It's okay to make profits, and we need that, because the alternative is, if you're an investor and you're picking between real estate and construct, or a real estate investment, an agricultural investment, or an aged care investment, at the moment you'd probably be picking real estate. Not maybe commercial real estate, but you might be picking real estate. So we've got to be able to compete with other sectors for that capital, and if we don't compete well and we don't have appropriate levels of return and our organisations aren't profitable, we won't be able to get that capital. But also, if we're not profitable, we won't be able to deliver the quality of service or invest in innovation. So I think that's a really critical component to it. Thanks, Belinda. I think we're stepping into the realms of, what does the government need to do in the May budget? What do we want to see then? We've got the recommendations from the Royal Commission. We've got some insights from Ministers Hunt and Colbeck around what they're thinking and their immediate reaction to the report. They've said that they will be making further announcements in the budget, I think, on the 11th of May. and then they'll also take some matters under consideration because they require further research, etc. What would you like to see? If you had to pick one thing, what would you like to see from Ministers Hunt and Colbeck around budget time?
Can I pick two things?
Absolutely.
I
really like the fact that you're breaking rules, Charles.
I don't think it'll surprise anybody on this call to hear me say increased funding. So whilst I said before that we've got to identify new revenue models, we've got to actually. I found it really interesting at the Leaders Summit last week when one of the speakers said we can't be price takers any longer. You've got to change that mindset, and it's quite interesting. We've been having that conversation in the context of our leadership group about how do we become price makers, how do we differentiate ourselves in that space. But having said that, we need to absolutely see increased funding. We need to be able to fund the increase in staff that we know that we all need. We need to be able to pay, as I've said before, those staff better. We need to see increased funding for more home care packages and increased funding for residential care. So there's no surprises there. But I think the other element is that, unfortunately, I think we can all agree that it is disappointing that we didn't have a unanimous view from our two commissioners. And that was failure one, and failure two, which we know that there was no financial model. So it's very difficult for us as a sector to comment upon anything at this point in time. So my second request would be a clear roadmap on how they are going to and how government is going to respond to the 148 recommendations. A roadmap. We don't need the answers. This is a 5 to 10 year journey, but paint that out clearly so that the sector can start to respond. I reflect, and I'd be really interested in Belinda's views on this, but if you think about Mr. Haynes' response in the Royal Commission, I think it was 76 recommendations, 6 clear principles. But interestingly, the financial sector owned it. The financial sector moved in advance of those recommendations. Belinda at the Commonwealth Bank, I was at the Commonwealth Bank once upon a time, took ownership and started to implement well in advance. So we as a sector need to own the 148 recommendations now. We can start moving and shaping, but a roadmap would be terrifically helpful.
Belinda, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I agree completely with what Charles has said. The interesting thing is that, and this is where I go, I feel for operators though as well, because as the bank, we have quite a big pool of, resources that we can look to, be it people, be it dollars, to bring in a number of these recommendations and move forward. But, I think there's things that the industry can be doing, even without enormous amounts of pots of cash. But I think that they need to have some guidance on where that cash is going to come from in the future. And, in one thing I would add to what Charles has talked about, and I would like to see the government comment on more clearly, is how are we going to pay all this in the future? The government's clearly said that it's unlikely that they'll put a levy in place. We've seen the recommendations come out and not talk about this being a consumer pay model. So I think the industry needs that, both a short-term, medium and long-term, about how do we want to fund this issue? Because what I don't want to see, and I'm sure not anyone wants to see, is us to be back in the same position in 10 years' time when our baby boomers are coming through and needing care, and what we had in place what we're putting in place now is not going to be fit for purpose. So whilst I don't think the government's going to have any, isn't going to be able to give comments on what the funding model will look like in the next few years, having that roadmap and the general thesis of it will be consumer funded, or we are going to look to this part in the government to fund it. I think that's really important, and I think will really show just the government's commitment to this sector and moving away from it being something that's in a budget each year, and that's driven by how we fund the sector, not actually a care-based model of funding.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we called out in our funding report last year around the aged care levy. An aged care levy won't work in the long term because levies tend to be finite apart from the Medicare levy and for a specific purpose. And we, in the research that we did, we found that there was support for an aged care levy for a short period of time, probably 2, 3, maybe 4 years, that would provide a pool of investment for the restructuring of the sector in total. The levy ends and then the sector gets on with its business. Doing things. So I can see a role for a levy, but it's not there for 20, 30, 40 years to prop up the sector. It needs to be utilised for transformation purposes and stabilisation and restructuring of the sector with whatever happens. The one thing that I want to see the government come out and tell me is what their vision for the sector is, how they envisage the interrelationship between capital markets, consumer markets and labour markets, what that means for providers, consumers and the people who work in this sector, and the harmonisation of employment price, so awards, etc., so that our people who are unbelievably good get what they deserve in terms of remuneration to participate. So, but I'll jump on my horse and throw over to Coralie and Melissa.
I got a couple of points I'd like to observe here, Daryl. I actually agree with you on the levy, and I'm kind of surprised that everyone goes, oh, a levy, because levies are government's bread and butter. Levies in local government land are very, very normal, and you'll normally do them around new developments and so forth to make sure that you've got certain infrastructure coming into place for a community. And certainly the state government is very familiar with levying as well in terms of waste and also in terms of fire management. So levy, I don't know why levy suddenly become a dirty word, and I think that the notion of grandfathered or timed levies is a really sensible one, because it builds the capital that you actually need as a government to fund something that essentially, I mean, if we're going to be honest about it, we're in crisis. So, funding a crisis takes money, and it's not something that we've got a long burn period on. I hear people talk about 10 years, but I reckon our pivot's about 2. So if you don't have sufficient cash to fund the pivot period, then obviously we're going to have difficulties in those areas. So I am just really kind of perplexed by a levy kind of moment. I think it's quite normal from the world that I've come from. I just go to the Banking Royal Commission and the notion that, with respect, Belinda, that when you have a profit, you've actually got that money to do the pivot. And in the banking world, that's again what happened, because they're for-profit agencies that had significant reserves that allowed them, and they did well in terms of addressing the issues that were raised and responded in that manner. But they had to bring significant resource, capital and human resource into that space to make that change. So again, that just links back to where this levy piece comes from, because for most of us, we don't have those significant capital reserves sitting there to make those pivot moments. And so to my next point, where you talk about not-for-profits, I keep wandering around the halls of my organisation going, I think we might just call ourselves not-for-loss because what we're doing in the not-for-profit sector is actually a whole lot of subsidising, and we're doing that through losses. And so we need to actually be not for loss. If we're too frightened to say we don't want to make profit, and quite frankly, if your business isn't making profit, your business model's slightly problematic. There wouldn't be a person on this panel that doesn't think that. I don't know how many people say it openly in the not-for-profit sector, but we do need to make profit in the not-for-profit, but I'm happy to call it not for loss if it philosophically freaks a whole lot of people out. And I think some of that funding, while there's funding needed for capital injection, particularly in terms of refurbishment and modernisation of ageing facilities, I also think some of that funding needs to come into the organisations to free people up to work on the business, because the biggest issue we have in aged care is we're all busy in the business, because the pressures are so significant. So even the people that sit at the executive level who, you know, have the eye to strategy are so often sucked into the operational vortex because the pressures at the operational level are so significant. So again, that funding piece actually needs to allow organisations to actually regroup and find the time and the space that they need to actually develop what their model of care or what they're offering to the market actually is going to be. And, you know, the elephant in the room is user pays. And I think that it's just madness given the amount of growth that we know is coming into the market and capacity to pay for that not to be on the table.
Might pull you up there, Coralie. We're getting close to time. Mel, do you have a few comments?
Just quickly, because I'm aware of time, it does fascinate me, this profit versus not-for-profit argument. The sector needs to make profit to reinvest capital to provide outstanding care for our residents. It's really simple. So if I go back to the original question about what do we need from government, we just need some decisiveness and timeframes and commitment around what that will look like. I share your sentiments about RADs, Daryl. You know, I have to throw in that they've worked, there's simplicity around them. You know, I'm not sure that's where the focus would be, around something that's actually working in the sector. And I look at Belinda because in our case, banks are our biggest investor. You know, they are part of our team. They sit at the table, they challenge us, they make decisions. So we need a decision from government that keeps banks really encouraged and confident to bank the sector, because without them, we are in real strife. So, you know, the one thing I would say is let's get some decision. Let's stop politicising the argument. And I know that is a, you know, sweeping statement when you're talking about government, but we actually just need some commitment on, doesn't matter who's in government, around the sector for the long term. So please just make a decision and let us move forward.
I might pull the conversation up there. We've had a couple of questions through the chat room, and you just touched on one of them, Mel, which is a couple of people know that you've come out of the banking sector. Now that you're a CEO, what's important about the banking sector? How does that relationship work? And you've spoken a little bit about it today, but if you can give me just in a minute or two what that looks like for you.
Yeah, sure. I've always said aged care is not for the faint-hearted, and you've got to truly love and understand the business. And that absolutely echoes for our banking relationship. You've got to have a banker that's got a seat at the table, that understands the terminology, the governance requirements, and they make your job really easy to do, because there's a debt funding side, but there's also the transactional banking side, and links with that.
Can you expand on that a little bit more, please?
Oh gosh,
the professional banking side, what does that mean? You've got 30 seconds.
Oh gosh. So you need, if I talk about, the banker needs to truly understand the industry, the cash flows. They need to be able to support you through times where you're looking great, and then there's the other complex side where you could be doing a development and cash flow becomes tight, and you know that they're not going to pull the pin on you. They're there to support you in true layman's terms. Yeah. They need to be able to understand the longer term forecasts. You build an aged care development, it's not an in-out investment. It takes a long time to build one of these things, and it also takes a long time to safely ramp up. So you need that consistency in the banking relationship that understands the timeline of bringing new developments online for consumers. But then there is the day-to-day transactional piece, which is really important, Daryl. It's around what I need to get money in, to get money out, and we need it to happen quickly. So you can't be educating a banker or a bank on what aged care is and what's a RAD and what's a DAP. They need to be in the sector and truly understand, you know, the day-to-day operation. So, like I said, they're investing.
I'll pull you up there because we are running out of time. I know you can talk about that all day. Thank you. The question, Coralie, you're in Newcastle, and it's typically the aged care funding models, etc., have been a one-size-fits-all wherever you are. Does there need to be a reflection of the differences in rural and remote Australia in terms of the funding model?
Oh, absolutely. And I think just in terms of, the way people come into care and how they are funding their care differs significantly from a rural area into a metro area. But really, the big issues for us in rural areas is staffing. I mean, people talk about staffing in metro areas, but in rural and remote areas, getting the staff that we need is really significant. One of the things that has been interesting through COVID is exactly this, meeting through Teams and Zoom, and whether in fact some of our services into aged care, particularly those clinical services that are required, but in a rural or remote area, could actually be developed and delivered in a different format.
Telehealth and
Yeah, so where technology can actually start helping smaller and less well-resourced communities to help people to stay in their communities and age in their communities so that they don't actually have to pull up and move to Newcastle. They can stay further up the mid-north coast with their people and with their families.
Thank you. Charles, just for the audience, I'm not actually answering all the questions here. I've just selected a couple that are relevant to individual panellists. Rather than trying to answer them all, we'll take some of those on notice and send answers back to you after the webinar is complete. But you've got a very strong background in property, Charles. What does that mean for the aged care sector going forward? What insights do you bring, I suppose, from your experience in property?
Yeah, sure. So I can answer that both from a physical perspective, but also from a funding perspective as well. So physically, there's no doubt that COVID-19 has and will influence the design of homes or residential villages into the future. I think that's come to the forefront, the sense of being able to deal with isolation. It's isolation when you have that unfortunate circumstance of an outbreak within a facility, but as we experienced at Dorothy Henderson Lodge. But also the isolation of those that are inside those facilities for extended periods of time. We're going to have to think about better ventilation, vertical transportation. There needs to be lots of it. We need to think about connectivity within the facilities. And the like, but also from a funding perspective, just to reinforce, I think what Melissa was saying, we need surety to attract either equity or debt. We need to have surety of revenue. Belinda needs to be able to bank it.
Yeah.
But equally important, I think. Equity capital, let's just call it capital, reacts best when there is transparency and that comes with very high levels of disclosure and benchmarking. So I think with the ingredients of surety of revenue, enhanced transparency and disclosure and good governance, the sector will find that it will be able to bring people like Belinda along for the journey, and we should be able to attract both equity or debt.
Yeah. Belinda, we brought you along. Would you like to say a few closing words? And then I'll respond.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. I'll start by saying, yes, we are here. We want to be part of this journey. It's such an important sector, and I've had clients already reach out to me after the report was released and asked, are we still there? And we're definitely still there. And for us is, as I said before, it's working with what that new model will look like, and we want to be part of those discussions because we want to be there and be banking aged care clients for years to come and helping growing what's being done in this sector, because it's such an important part of society. And it's one that we as individuals, not just as a bank, I feel like we have an obligation to help and be part of the future of this sector.
Thanks, Belinda. I think of this industry the same as I think of other industries in this interaction between capital markets, consumer markets and labour markets. We need a sector that's strong, that actually attracts capital and retains it over a long period of time, sufficiently to make strong, worthwhile investments in property and innovation. I think we need to reward and retain our workforce, and more importantly, recognise them. We need to recognise them for the great contribution they give. They've turned up every day throughout a global pandemic and services for the people in care, and that's just an extraordinary effort and something that just needs to be recognised, celebrated and applauded. I think that if we get the capital models right, with the right appropriate returns, we get our workforce right in terms of the recognition and the reward, then the consumers will strongly benefit by great quality and safe care. And that'll be an outcome that we can actually hold high. I think I would really like the government to actually provide a vision of what that looks like from their perspective, because without that, a roadmap could go nowhere. We've had roadmaps before, and that's the major concern in just developing a roadmap. We need to know where it's aimed at. I would really like to thank all of you for participating today. As new CEOs, I'm actually feeling better. I'm feeling far more hopeful and optimistic now than I was an hour ago. I think that the three of you have brought some beautiful insights into why you're here. I think you've shown the passion that you have for this sector, and also an insight that it's actually achievable. The outcome's achievable where we can get to where we need to be. And that means better, safer, higher quality care for those people who need it. Belinda, once again, thank you. It's great to have CommBank involved and get your insights, because a critical component of this is the capital component, and that sort of debt levels and how we deal with RADs, etc. If there is a replacement, everybody will be leaning on the banking sector to assist in that, and there's a limited capacity to do so, I know. But once again, thank you. I think your insights will be absolutely invaluable for everybody who has tuned in to listen to us, and I hope you will have a great day. I refer you also to our reports that we've published over the last little while, and hopefully we'll have another one in the next few weeks that expands on that thinking. But thank you, everybody, and best wishes.